Well, thank you all for coming to the very last session of, I hope, a very informative and exciting and interesting PDF day here in New York City. And to close out today at PDF Day, we have a panel of experts, longtime experts in this space. These guys were experts and well known in the industry when I first got into it 18 years ago. So that probably telling you more information that they would want me to actually say. In any event, so I'm very excited to be able to present to you here Harvey Spencer of Harvey Spencer Associates, Mark Gross of Data Conversion Labs, and Peter Duff of AdLib Software.
Hello.
Would you guys care to introduce yourselves a little bit more expansively?
Yeah, I'm Harvey Spencer, as Duff just said. We've been focused on what we've called the capture industry now for the last nearly 30 years. And what that is defined as these days is trying to take semi-structured or unstructured information and to make it usable in the computer world. So PDF fits squarely into that space.
I'm Mark Gross at Data Conversion Laboratory. I really spent most of my life taking things out of PDF and turning into structured documents. So I'm a little bit of duck out of water over here. But I mean, most of what things we do is create XML and create metadata, but most of the documents are PDF today. And so we've learned more and more PDF, and actually are now producing things in PDF so people can actually read them. So that's what my company does. We, Data Conversion Laboratory, convert documents, and a lot of it is in the XML world is a lot of where we spend our time.
Thanks, Mark. I'm Peter Duff. I'm CEO of AdLib Software, and I think we might do the opposite of what Mark does, which we turn content into PDF. We sort of focus in the ECM space, so super high volumes, large repository of documents, and so we help organizations automate processes and processes that they perhaps didn't know or think that could be automated.
Thank you all. So I'm going to ask them all a few questions, and then we'll open up the floor and ask you guys to perhaps come up with your own questions for these guys. So my first question is for you, Harvey. So I started in the ECM space in 1996. I started a document imaging service bureau back then, and you were already legendary at that time. I would go down to San Jose to talk to Adobe, and they'd say, "Yeah, Harvey was just in here telling us what we're doing wrong." So that's how I got introduced to your name, in fact. So my question for you: back when I started into document imaging, it was a TIFF-based world. And I'd like to believe of myself, I think it's true, that I started the first PDF-centric document imaging service bureau. But I was very, very lonely at that time. Everywhere else it was TIFF. And my question is, why is it still a TIFF world? Why isn't it a PDF world today? And what's behind the tremendous lag in PDF support in the imaging and ECM space?
I guess I'd first like to sort of clarify what I think is a misapprehension or a misnomer, maybe, is that TIFF is a header. What is actually been the case with document management systems is that they've compressed document files in a lossless 2D compression, i.e. Group 4, CCITT Group 4 as it originally was. And that came about in the early days, back in the 80s, when we first got into the document imaging space. Because there was no PDF, and so we were looking for, as I say, a high quality, high compression capability that would be suitable for documents. Documents have a lot of white space, interspersed with pieces of black, so you can, with a run length compression, which basically optimizes towards the white space, works very, very efficiently, and that was Group 4. Group 3, incidentally, is used in faxes, so it's a linear compression of a similar type. So everybody built that, and then they started putting TIFF headers on it in order to try to make it more ubiquitous. So now we call that TIFF, but in fact what it is, it's group 4 compression. And what's now happening, and so PDF is another header structure which allows you to decompress and look at images through a viewer. So underlying PDF, as you all well know, are all sorts of different images, all sorts of different formats, which actually is its goodness and its bane. So it's good and bad because you don't exactly know what you've got, and viewing it doesn't necessarily deal with that. And Peter, I think, mentioned briefly PDF image plus text this morning. I tend to feel that's a dangerous format because you tend to look at it and think, this looks like such and such, and therefore it must be correct. But the text behind it, which you're trying to search on, might be very incorrect. Anyway, so from the document management vendors and the ECM vendors and the workflow vendors, they've got this format which is efficient, which is optimized towards textual type of documents. They can display and leverage the PDF viewer whenever they want to. So why change? It's sort of way down the list of priorities. I think that PDF A3 has the potential to change that dramatically. I'm sort of fascinated by this concept of being able to add a file to a PDF formatted file. And I'm sort of, not only XML, I'm sort of fascinated, which we can talk about a little bit later if you want to, fascinated by the idea of carrying JSON data in that and being able to drive all sorts of processes from that, i.e. RESTful applications. Anyway, I've spoken enough.
Yeah, I just want to, I mean, the TIFF format that we spoke about is really, is the image format. So, and even if we're going to PDF, if you're just using images, it's really a similar thing, just a different kind of envelope. I think what, when we think about PDF, we think about PDF that has characters and all the other print kind of things in it that give it all those. So I think it's very simple why TIFF is still around. TIFF is a very simple format to produce automatically off any scanner. That's the first thing that comes off. In order to go to PDF, you've sort of got to take it to the next step, or you have to produce it out of printing. So it's ubiquitous because of that reason. I mean, if you've got information that's in a computer and it's in any kind of formats that we spoke about today, I think producing in PDF is the obvious way to do it. It's just not as much of it that way.
Yeah, I think that TIFF sort of remains because I think it's easy. I think, as you said, I think that there's a little bit of lack of knowledge out there, perhaps, about what else there could be. So there are people that are surprised that you can actually take an image document and make it searchable, and you can actually do things like embed metadata in it. And of course, that starts to make a document much more useful, more findable, and create corporate value. But organizations, I think, have sort of historically been used to, looking at things like paper. You store paper in a box, you put the banker's box in a closet, then you ship it off to Iron Mountain or something like that for long-term storage. Isn't TIFF just the same thing as that? So, but PDF is very different. PDF then can be used much more than just a piece of paper because you can put much more inside that envelope.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to switch up to a slightly different question I had here. I'm very curious to know, I've expressed some frustration on my part back in 1996. I think the world was rooted in TIFF compressed images. And I'd rather, for me, I'd quite like to see them take advantage of the PDF technology. But leaving that aside, how much, compared to say the world the way it was 15 years ago in 2000, how much closer are large organizations today in terms of optimizing their use of electronic document technology? Are they a lot further forward, or are they just crawled ahead just a tiny little bit?
Let me take a first shot at it. Let me just put it in perspective. 15 years ago, barely anybody was really using email. I mean, 15 years ago was, I mean, what PDF started, what, 17, 18, 19 years ago?
Yeah.
I mean, I just spoke, last week I spoke about the frustrations of the ebook technology and why ebooks aren't perfect. And I pointed out we've been printing books on paper for 550 years or so. We've been producing ebooks for about 3 years. Right, that's when the latest versions of EPUB have come out that really has anything. So really, if you look at 15 years back and 15 years forward, it's a totally radically different world. So I think the answer is yes, people are using it much more actively. People are using email most of the time rather than, I mean, the last time, I mean, 2 weeks ago, somebody said I had to mail him a letter, and that was like, really? I've got to mail a letter? It was the first piece of stationery I've used in probably 6 months. So I think we definitely are further ahead. It's just frustrating, and I hear your frustration. Why isn't everybody doing things the best possible way? But I think things have radically changed over the last few years, and I think if we just take a step back, we realize that's going to change radically in the next 5 years and the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think that there has been a radical change in how organizations deal with electronic content. You know, email is one thing, the web is something else, and mobile is a third thing. And organizations, I think, are reeling with, what do I do with all of this? How do I manage this? How do I control this? How do I stay compliant? How do I prepare for e-discovery? It's an enormous challenge, and it's a little bit overwhelming for them to try and figure out how to deal with this. I think on one hand, if you look at 15 years ago, the things that they were doing 15 years ago, they probably made enormous progress on, but then the tsunami happened, and they've had to try and figure out how to deal with that. And so that's an enormous challenge, but I think things are starting to shift a little bit. I think there's more education out there. I think things like information governance are started to be discussed in organizations and enterprises in order to try and figure out, how do we put and codify a good set of rules so that we understand how we need to operate as organizations, so that we can start to do the smart things that we need to do with documents. So I think it's on its way.
The interesting thing about the whole thing of big data is we've got this explosion of data, but there's still paper processes in place that people have to manage. So it's all very nice to sort of think, okay, we're going to create it as electronic, we're going to manage it as a PDF normal, as data, but that doesn't necessarily happen because you don't necessarily have control over who's sending you what or how. And processes tend to take a long time. There's also this concept of dark data that people are muttering about, which is all the historical stuff associated with customers, which often is sitting forgotten in stacks of paper, the Iron Mountains of this world. So you end up, and then if you're dealing with mobile, you're ending up with a complete multimedia mess of stuff. So you've got not only potential pictures of documents, you've got voice annotations, you've got potentially video, you've got text in all sorts of which ways, and all that's got to be managed somehow. So yes, we're very much moving to electronic age. All the growth is in electronic. Is it in a nice format that we can extract information from easily? No. Will it ever be? Probably not. Do we have to make sense of it? Yes. And that's going to require a mixed set of formats. The PDF wrapper is interesting because it gives you the ability to manage or to collect and transmit all those formats and potentially able to deal with it. But it's not a unipolar world by any means.
So I'm going to now ask you the question which we discussed earlier, and I thought we all wanted to hear what somebody else would say in answer to this question. 25 years ago, fax technology was completely conventional. Everybody had a fax machine. It was completely routine to ask for a fax, and nobody really used email for much of anything whatsoever. Today, fax is completely dead technology. I'll leave aside, there are exceptions, for sure. But in the main, we don't sell a lot of fax machines, and we certainly don't request a lot of faxes that be sent delivered. And we still, is PDF going to go the way of fax? Or will there be some other technology that comes along to take it, to take it over, to radically revolutionize how we share and use electronic documents?
Should I start? Technology doesn't go away, technology just evolves. It amazes me. I started back in, I'm sorry about this, I started back in the 60s with punch cards and things like that. In those days, we invented things like the magnetic character reading, which is still here in checks. We invented OCR-A, OCR-B as fonts. We invented OMR, Mark Sense. Which when I started was a magnetic way of automatically capturing information, which is why you had to use a B pencil incidentally, or a number 2 pencil. And that's still around, used for surveys and things like that. So things don't change, and there's huge amounts of infrastructure that get behind a format. In my estimation, the PDF structure and the PDF header will evolve and change, and is already evolving and changing to support whatever formats we're going to invent and carry as a control mechanism, if you will.
So just on the fax machine, my bank recently, because of security requirements, started requiring that for certain kind of requests, I had to follow up an email request with a fax request. So it's not totally gone, but I tend to agree that things don't, the concepts behind them don't change. It's the medium that changes. And the major changes that have happened over the last few years, I mean, a fax machine is really just a scanner that's sending things over electronically one way. We're still using scanners and turning them to TIFF files and maybe putting PDF headers around them and setting them around. But the technologies that have changed have been things like mobile and cell phones, and now we're expecting to do things in our hands where before 5 years ago, we never even have thought of it. You know, if you look, you know, I looked at, Ray Kurzweil has a fascinating book where he gives 50 years of what's going to be in the future that he wrote in 1997. And I mean, going back into 25 years from now, it's sort of a blank space over there. I mean, you know, we're not using cell phones. We'll probably be using implants and have retinal projection and maybe even skip that and goes. So it's very hard to look in terms of all that technology is changing so quickly. But in terms of what we're really dealing with, a page is still a graphical representation. And when you look at it as a PDF, it's not that different from what Gutenberg was printing in 1450. What has changed is the ability to search through it and keep the characters going. And I think the representations are what's going to change. We really have representations of a page, which is what most of PDF is, and you have very structured data, which is numbers and things like that, and metadata, which is, you know, in my world is XML or spreadsheets or things like that. And I don't think that's really changed much. I'm not sure it will change much in terms of what we're trying to represent. Where it goes and how it gets into our brains, that probably will change in ways we can't even imagine right now.
Those are some excellent answers, and I don't know if I have a lot to add to that, but I think that, you know, from a regulatory perspective, you know, government bodies and agencies are demanding that they receive information in particular formats. The FDA has, you know, determined as an example that PDF is the format that they're going to receive submissions in, and that change, I think, took about, I don't know, 12 or 15 years to actually move from paper to PDF. And I think that they've just got there now, but there are still regulatory agencies in the pharma space around the world that are still accepting paper. So from a window perspective, I would think that it would take at least another 10 or 15 years for something new to come along. But I agree with Harvey as an example that there's going to be an evolution happen. I mean, even in the last, you know, number of years, PDF itself has evolved enormously to include PDF-A, to include PDF-E, to include PDF-UA most recently. PDF-A3 is a fantastic format that holds a lot of promise for the future. These things will continue to evolve, and we'll need to be able to keep up with that evolution. But I think PDF itself has actually shown itself to be extremely flexible and able to adapt with the times.
Yeah, I mean, I can even see the Internet of Things creating PDFs at some stage for records management purposes. Why not?
Indeed. So when you, so there's a lot of vendors in this room. You may have noticed, probably at this point in the day, probably about half or so. And I'm curious what nuggets of wisdom that you guys would have to offer to vendors selling PDF-based electronic document technologies from your experience. What's the single key thing that they need that they should be thinking about, considering, or talking about with customers?
As I said at the beginning, I'm fascinated by the PDF A3 format. I think that's got just colossal. I think you can just dream with that format of the sort of stuff you can do with it, how you can drive workflow from it. I think in a lot of ways we should drop the PDF-A word in this, because at this stage it doesn't become an archival standard, it starts to become a transactional standard. And you can drive workflow, you can drive dynamic workflow off it. And then you, as I say, if you start looking at carrying instead of XML, something like JSON, then you can start to see how you can drive different RESTful APIs off this. I think that's exciting. That's where I'm going.
And I'm going to go back to where my world is mostly structured data and XML. We've heard a little bit about the PDF wrapper being able to handle those, and PDF being able to, and what I would look for, but I don't see much of it around, and it doesn't seem that the tools are out there to really work with it. And I think that combining, being able to develop the tools that you can put more structured information in and more information behind it, and put XML in there, would really combine it and really provide something that could be make it more universally applicable.
I'm going to take a bit of a different approach on this one. I think that what needs to happen out there is there needs to be a ton of education. We do this really cool process. We call it PDF therapy. We send a therapist into some of our customers, and they talk to people, and we don't actually bring a couch in or anything, but we talk to people and try and understand what their pain points are around this stuff, and then we talk to them about what they can do about it. And over, they're just astonished that the problems that they thought were unsolvable are absolutely solvable. And so I think what, as a group of collective, PDF vendors can do here is work on educating the market on the things that business get value out of from PDF, how we can transform business, how we can create the PDF-powered enterprise. And I think that that's really important to do. And I think as we do that, if we want to make sure that, back to the question, will PDF be around 50 years from now, that will be the thing that we can best do to guarantee that that's the case.
So I'd like to open it up to the audience at this point. I'll be repeating your question for the camera. But what questions would you have for this panel? Anybody got one? I do have more if you don't.
I got a question. What's the biggest deficiency you perceive to be in PDF?
What's the biggest deficiency you perceive in PDF?
Oh, interesting. Well, you could start.
Well, okay, so.
Mark's going to say it's not XML, right?
It's not XML. Well, let me. I think there's a lack of standardization, which I see, and I heard several times through the day that if you can convince your authors to produce these documents in a certain way, or then it would be easier. And in my business, I'm getting millions of pages of PDF documents coming from all over the world, from many different people and many different kinds of institutions, and there is a lack of standardization. So I'm dealing with anytime I've got scientific documents that have special characters in them, I've got to make sure that the Greek characters are the right Greek characters and things like that. I've got to make sure that the characters are actually in there. Some of the things we saw before with the Chinese characters not being shown properly. Tables aren't always done the same way. So there's a lack of standardization, which doesn't just impact me, but I think impacts anytime you're trying to transmit large volumes of documents to other people to be able to use them in other ways other than just read them the way it is. I think more sensitivity there would be very helpful. But I think so. But yes, and it's not XML. But if the standardization was there, I'd be able to move it back and forth much more easily.
I think one of the neat things that I think some people and organizations are starting to investigate is things like PDF reflow. So I mean, one of the real strengths of PDF is that it actually looks exactly like a piece of paper, it feels like a piece of paper, reads like a piece of paper, but when you put that on a mobile device, it doesn't really read that easily. And so the ability to sort of break out of that paper-based view and reflow text so that you can actually look at it on a mobile device, I think would be one thing that would actually afford an awful lot of more acceptance from a PDF perspective.
I'm fascinated by what's being described now as the Zugfed standard. That's how we called it FERD, which is how I knew it. But basically, that's a standardized format to carry invoice data. I think that has colossal potential in multiple different XML, incidentally, potential to act as an EDI standard across the world. But what it brings up is the issue of standards, that the more standards that are put in terms of naming conventions and associated with fields, the more efficient automation we can start to drive. So I think standardization is probably its PDF strength is not having very many standards, having all these different things underneath it. But on the other hand, it's also its weakness, and we've got to be real careful that it just doesn't go to a stage where it collapses under its own weight, I think.
I'll switch to something else. It's even more provocative. So what do you see as the future of PDF if people no longer read? Or reading and writing are no longer primary sources of data input? So and the specific idea I have, and Harvey will remember this, is when we were young, we learned multiplication tables. Remember that?
Yep. Still can do them.
My son, 8 years old, is not going to learn multiplication table, which may not be a good thing, but that's the way they do it today. It's new math, right?
Sure.
So maybe in 25 years, people won't be reading much of it.
Well, maybe.
So the question is, is it possible you think that people won't really be reading content in 25 years? I guess Fred's point is that maybe they'll only ingest it from video, from audio streams, for example. And is that fair, Fred?
Yes.
And
Other methods.
Okay. And what do you think of that?
I think PDF gets to support it. I think, why can't you record audio within a PDF wrapper and convert that to controllable information, text probably. Why can't already we have read back within PDF, so it has an audio interface capability. I think it becomes language independent in that respect and will translate dynamically as we get there. I'm sort of fascinated by some of the technologies in terms of semantic understanding and sentiment analysis that are coming out. I think though you start to apply those, you can do some very neat things with records management and classification. I think an SMS message, I mean, my children, for instance, won't respond to me on the phone at all. They don't respond unless I SMS them. And I'm increasingly embedding documents in SMS messages and other types of media. I think that those, once you want to start controlling them and managing them, you'll convert them into a format that you can manage, which seems to me a PDF potentially gives you the ability to do that.
All right, so that is a provocative question. So, it may be, the ultimate is some kind of telepathy where people just have their thoughts going from one person to another. So that may obviate PDF.
Mark, I mentioned my telepathy server. I really sorry did that.
But I think in terms of reading, I think there's a big difference between reading and writing and using a calculator for math. Using a calculator for math, the mathematical concepts are still there, the creative concept is still there. We've just removed a tool that was needed to calculate things, and computers do it automatically, and are skills that aren't really that necessary. I was the last guy in my engineering class to stop using a slide rule, so I'm pretty conservative on that stuff. But I think when it comes to reading and writing, that is the way we express thoughts. The images are the way we express thoughts. I know, in the 1700s, painting is the way pictures got done. By the 1800s, well, pictures got done with photography, and painting still exists, but it's a different kind of painting to put out different kinds of creative thoughts. So, and I think reading and writing may be the same thing. It's true that SMS and 140 characters is the way many people communicate, but I think over time there are many thoughts you can't put there, and my kids who didn't read very much over time now are reading and writing. My youngest is now a lawyer. He's writing these lengthy documents where he used to just SMS me all the time. So I think when you have complex thoughts, I can't quite visualize what that next thing is going to be, but I don't think it's the same as, until you get to telepathy, I'm not sure there's that much in between there.
I think even if you get to telepathy, at some point, there's going to be a need to keep a record in some way of a communication. And so, sure, there may not be paper, but you still need to be able to, express something, record something, store something, look back at something. There needs to be an archive record of things for, historical effect or for business requirements. And so I think, in some way, that's always going to be a requirement. But I also think humans tend to, require a high-touch type of environment where they still like to feel things. And I don't know how quickly that will go away. I think that we're very tactile in terms of how we interact.
So the focus here, and apparently of the industry, has been on the development of these standards for the document format. And I'm wondering if there are similar projects for standards relating to the viewers or the readers, because although PDFs always look exactly the same, they look very different from system to system sometimes. There seems to be disagreement among various readers as to how to render it, or as to what's an error and what's not. And that's a frustration to somebody who's sending out PDFs to the world and you don't know how they're going to be looked at.
So Mark, your question is, are the projects similar to the standardization projects for the file formats, but specific to reader software?
Yeah.
The viewers, right.
So let me take a shot at that just from a different direction. I spoke about ebooks before, and I mentioned ebooks. I spoke about ebooks last week, and one of the big problems in ebooks, and there's an EPUB standard, an EPUB 3 standard, which defines a lot of things, and it defines how to do math and how to do tables. But every manufacturer and every software defines it in a slightly different way. And some of it is a matter of definition, and some of it decisions are, it's very hard to render everything. So they make decisions on what's important in their particular audiences. And it is a frustration because you put something out and it's going to look very different from place to place. But I think over time there's going to be standardization, just like there has been in other places. It's not been that long that we've been trying to render very complex materials, I think. So, and the hardware is, we can define standards, I think, relatively easily compared to trying to make them work in hardware. So I think it's just going to take time to catch up.
I think that a different way to look at that might be around, what is the content and what do you really want it to look like? If you're trying to emulate a piece of paper, then, of course, you almost need to freeze the content in that format and so that it's fixed in that format. But if you're trying to actually produce content that can be read on multiple different devices, then actually being able to morph that content may be a valid thing to do as well. And so I do think there needs to be standards around that, though, so that we can say, well, when I print it out, I know that it's always going to look the same. Or when I look at it in a page view way, I know that it's always going to look the same. But it would be cool to be able to take that content to Europe and have it work the same way on A4 versus A size, and then be able to look at it on your mobile device and actually have it reflow so that you can read it in a different way. And so, maybe different standards around, fixed content versus reflowed content is something that needs to be addressed.
I think it's needed.
Thank you.
So the one thing I would add is that the subset standards of PDF, PDF-A, PDF-UA, PDF-E, and so forth, do actually include reader requirements in addition to file format requirements.
That I've sent documents out there in PDF-A that my software, good software from vendors here, says is PDF-A. People are getting different experiences depending on the software they're using to view it.
Indeed, and because there's a standard does not necessarily thereby mean that various viewing implementations out there are conforming to it. One of the things that does somewhat concern me about the subset standards for PDF is that there's a great deal of attention paid to the file format requirements in these various subsets. Relatively little attention is paid to the reader requirements that are in these subsets as well. For example, how many of you procuring a software to view PDF files, think about, if you're interested in PDF-A, think about whether or not that software conforms to the reader requirements for PDF-A. My guess is perhaps none of you do. But nonetheless, those requirements are in the specification. I think it's very important for people, once they understand the scope of requirements in the specification, to begin to demand this of their vendors in order to try and mitigate these sorts of problems.
So we're back to the education problem again.
Back to the education problem. It never goes away. There's a question over here.
I have a comment actually on the last point.
Okay.
There are a number of initiatives to make sure that viewers and reproducers of content actually do the right thing. If I'm not mistaken, there is a test suite for PDF-A viewers that has some exotic name I can never remember. Dietrich might know. But there are other initiatives, for example, to make sure that different viewers show transparency the same, or that they all show overprint in the same way. A number of very technical concepts in PDF that are often not done correctly.
Right.
So saying that there is no standardization or push to get standardization, I think, is not correct. But there is work to be done. And unfortunately, it's not always going in the right direction. If you look at what happens on iPads and tablets, for example, most of the viewers are really, really bad because they compromise. And they have to. The machine is not fast enough to do a really good thing in the time that the user expects it to be there. So they compromise.
All right. So thanks. David's been pointing out that there are, in fact, there are a number of initiatives out there with respect to reader standards, but also very correctly pointing out that those initiatives have yet to find much traction in conventional consumer software. I think it's probably fair to say.
I just want to add one thought that came across. I mean, it's a compromise, and part of the reason it's a compromise is because there's a basic contradiction between the two things we try to do. One is to have an exact copy of something, and the other is we're trying to render it from electronic data. And reflowing it is a third area of contradiction. So if you want an exact duplicate, the only way to do that is to have that TIFF copy that actually has everything on it. Once you take it apart into electronic elements and then try to re-render it, there's always things that are gonna be happening, and there's always creativity that gets applied. There are thousands of fonts out there that people can apply. So there's always going to. I just think there's a contradiction between some of the things that are being applied, and that might be hurting the process.
I I don't think so. I think what you're talking about is a totally different problem. Once you start talking about reflow content, you're in a totally different world. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about something where it's only about the reproduction of fixed content. And even there, the viewer is compromised because they don't have the calculating power to do it correctly, or because there are good business reasons to take shortcuts.
We can take one more question, and then we will hold the competition for the shirt right over there in the corner.
Yes, similar to that. My personal view, and I would love your take on it. My personal view to help on the viewer side would be if Adobe were to open source Acrobat, because then that would make it so much easier, and you would have as in the entire ecosystem would then be allowed to contribute. And obviously, maybe the standards committee can be the referee of what actually gets committed or not. But that would maybe be a way to help a lot of different environments. And I don't mean to step on any vendors who have PDF viewers, but it would make it just everything a lot easier for them, I would think, and the entire ecosystem to work more efficiently.
So it's an interesting point. The suggestion is that Adobe should open source Acrobat. I'm just imagining Leonard Rosenthal's reaction to that if he were here today. It's probably a good thing that he's not. It would be an impressive move, and maybe not a bad one from Adobe's point of view. After all, their two critical decisions that were so important back in the day were to publish the PDF specification and to make Adobe Reader free. And those were moves that were not quite as dramatic as that one, but nonetheless very, very important, critical to the development and success of PDF. So with that, we've come to the end of the panel session for PDF Day, and I want to thank you all very much. And before I entirely let you go, I want to reveal to you, I've already mentioned this before, we're going to have a little competition here. And this is only open to users. And none of you vendors are able to participate in this particular competition. Sorry about that. Here we have a large shirt, a PDF Day shirt, much like the one, in fact, identical to the one that I'm wearing right now. And this shirt will go to the first person who can tell me how many ISO standards there are for PDF technology. It's a number. Yeah, you can just sing out if you know the number. Or you can just start throwing out random numbers and you might get it.
That number is in the dark data.
I heard a number that was relatively close.
5, 6.
Who said 6?
I'll give it to my staff member who stayed at the office, so the rest of us could come.
A magnanimous gesture, Fred. Folks, thank you all very, very much for attending PDF Day. I want to tell you that we're going to be sending you all a survey after the fact. Probably you'll get it tomorrow, possibly Monday. I would ask you all, please fill out this survey. It won't take you very long, and it will help us tremendously, provide us critical information, what we did right, what we did wrong, how we could make this better, and what more we could do to bring the PDF information and education your way and assist you, whether you're end user or vendor. So once again, thank you very much, and have a good evening.